I think the first thing to think about is, and it's kind of a bit of a context around one of the challenges with payments on the continent. About 80% of payments that go to the US, for instance, in 2017, were actually going to a different region to the US. And of that 80%, about 20% of that kind of found its way back into the continent, about 35% to Asia. Why is this important? If you think about it, you want to make a payment to an African country, that transaction first goes to the US and maybe another correspondent bank in another different region, and then makes its way back into the continent. It introduces a number of inefficiencies from a time perspective, from a cost perspective, and the process is often a black box. Now, when we think about what we're trying to fix for and what we should be thinking about fixing for in payments, it's that transparency, that simplicity, and actually making it easy for individuals to make payments or corporates to make payments. Now, there are three primary drivers of payments that we're starting to see come through. Commercial payments, quite simply, one company to the next, cross-border. It's a big business that's coming through. Immigration is actually a big business that is starting to drive a lot of cross-border transactions. We're starting to see lots of immigration into the continent. Initially, it was to Europe and Americas, but we're seeing within the continent a lot of immigration moving across. That business is valued at about $40 billion US. And just to give you a sense, immigration as a percentage or a value of national GDP in some countries can go as high as 25%. So it's quite a significant part of contributing to what's happening in those countries. And finally, what's driving this cross-border payments are issues, scenarios such as medical care, such as education and tourism. That's starting to grow within the continent in itself. Those are the key elements that we see driving the need for cross-border, simplified cross-border solutions, largely small values and of high volume in nature. If I think about what are some of the key drivers of this change, there would be a few for me. One is we're starting to see an increase in political will to drive regional integration. You see lots of countries thinking about how to simplify the ease of doing business between one country and another. And we're seeing, obviously, strengthening regional hubs, SADC being one, ECOWAS being another, East African Community being another. And there are many, many others, COMESA, I could name a whole lot, are all thinking about how do we simplify the free movement of goods, the free movement of money between neighboring countries. So, the political will is a critical driver of the process. We're also starting to see a number of regional corporates that are growing. And ourselves as ABSA, we're a regional corporate. MTN, Baju in East Africa, and many others, Dangote in Nigeria, are classic examples of regional corporates that are spreading their wings, these African big enterprises. And for them to conduct their business efficiently, they need to think about how to move money in between different countries. And that's starting to drive this concept of regional integration. Perhaps two other things to think about. One would be that African countries are starting to improve their financial infrastructure. You've got governments thinking about how to improve the means of moving money between different zones. So there's investment from governments coming through to improve the infrastructure. But that's not all. You also have a number of fintechs that are coming through trying to solve exactly the same thing, how to win in payments, how to simplify the payments infrastructure. You've got remittances organizations that have been here for some time that are also improving their capability, Western Union being a classic example. All of them working to figure out how to simplify the movement of funds between countries. You've got telcos, you've got many different organizations that are thinking about this. All of these organizations working together are actually improving the infrastructure of simplifying how to do payments. If you recall, as I started in my initial conversation, today to move money between African countries is complex. But I think all these organizations have identified that as an opportunity and are working towards trying to simplify that. In trying to solve some of the key challenges around moving cross-border payments and simplifying the cross-border process. All these organizations are working together. Separately and I suppose together in some instances. There are partnerships that are starting to grow in trying to simplify, in trying to ensure that there's enough transparency and to reduce the complexity as well as the cost of actually moving money between countries. Regulatory pressure are related to money laundering or anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism financing, are creating stringent processes, new checks and balances to make sure that financial institutions are not facilitating illicit funds. Now, you can think about what that means from a global bank doing business or having a correspondent banking relationship with a small African bank. There's a requirement around transparency of information, automated reporting, and many other processes put into place that may be too stringent for a small organization to try and adhere to. And we're starting to see certainly a decrease in the number of corresponding banking relationships with global financial institutions as well as smaller local financial institutions on the continent. Now, as a financial institution on the continent, that does not remove your responsibilities towards, trying to make payments or trying to make cross-border payments. With 20% of payments to Africa going outside of the region coming back in, the fact that you are losing a correspondent banking relationship makes that life much more difficult, which means financial institutions on the continent need to start thinking about how do they facilitate these payments within the context of not being seen to be facilitating terrorism and money laundering activities, but coming with unique opportunities to solve the problem while not introducing more complexity and introducing more red tape, if I can call it that, in facilitating simplified, low-value cross-border payments.